Led by a man named Calvus Oprum, the Cardovian Unification Wars began in 1703, with the Muscovite clan attacking neighboring clans and integrating them into their greater nation. By 1793, the road to a Cardovian republic was neck-high in blood, and tensions still ran deep. Calvus Oprum had been replaced in 1750 due to his old age, and was being replaced by the Ligia household, with Cavio Ligia becoming the ruling leader of Cardovia. However, Oprum's dream of a Cardovian kingdom lived on through an underground organization known as the People's Crown, which would later surface in the 1800s election. However, they would continuously fail to seize power through the 1800s and early 1900s. As the Cardovian War for Unification destabilized the region, the nation of Igros, already struggling from ethical conflicts, was emboldened to balkanize themselves. Starting on June 7, 1709, the Celtic tribes launched a revolution in the nation's capital. With the support of Ruthenian arms dealers, the Celtic uprising in the capital triggered a chain reaction of other ethnic groups to break free from the Agrosian flag. In 1712, the Agrosian royal family was caught trying to flee the city under the cover of the rebel infighting over who was to get the capital, and executed. They were hung from the palace walls with a crude version of what would become the Celtic flag. Following the bloody victories of 1712 and watching as the Cardovian Wars had ravaged the region, the former members of Igros, now struggling in independent nations of different ideologies, Chaldia led the ideas of unification. However, many of their leaders were unhappy with the likely result of the change and demanded duels to decide who should be the ultimate leader. A young man by the name of Daniel Friga rose through the ranks of the duelists as politicians. Having the experience from dueling from the few years spent in the Celtic army, he was able to defeat the leaders of other nations, placing him as the supreme leader of the new Celtic Empire, although he quickly did away with that system and put into place the United People's Republic. In the 1920s, the Cardovian Republic began to face internal struggles due to a collapsing economy, a neglected armed forces, and experiencing high crime rates, as well as an increasingly large pirate presence. The Ruthenian Union began attempting to sway the course of Cardovian history, and from 1918 to early 1920, they were bribing, assassinating, and shifting the overall political landscape. However, on February 4th, 1920, the Cardovian Army Command found out about the growing Ruthenian control and publicized it, putting the final nail in the coffin for its republic. After being confronted with the truth about the Cardovian Senate, the People's Crown would see a surge in support, the alluring promise of a stronger Cardovia enticing the youth, including many members of the military. And in 1921, a nationwide uprising surged throughout major cities, ports, and towns alike. The capital, only guarded by the Senate Guard, would withstand a siege of disorganized rebels until the Cardovian army arrived and organized the rebels around the city before laying siege. In 1922, the capital would fall, and the senators of the nation would be executed before placing the leader of the People's Crown at the throne, Ober Volk, finally founding the Kingdom of Cardovia. With Volk in charge of Cardovia, Cardovia's military spending skyrocketed, and Ruthenia fell under the crosshairs of an angered kingdom. Ruthenia had always been a passive conqueror, always supplying rebels, suing unrest and submission. It never actually intended to fight a modern war, still mostly made up of horse cavalry and clinging to the ideals of melee warfare. They were an easy prey for anyone who intended to destroy the nation. Cardovia seemed very intent on it. So, on December 2nd, 1923, the Valshar Republic and the nation of Lumain formed the Holy Defense Hemisphere, an alliance intent on deterring more bloodshed in the already unstable region. After a failed attempt to intimidate Cardovia into submission, the Kingdom of Cardovia struck a deal with the United People's Republic. and formed the first United Front Corps, featuring the best equipment, newest vehicles, and even a few experimental aircraft. Within months of being formed, amphibious invasion combat drills began running on the Isle of Enzumbor. The Greater Alliance was formed and already preparing for war. At 0800, on the morning of March 7th, 1925, the Greater Alliance declared war on the Union of Rithonia. At 0845 on the same day, the Greater Alliance launched a naval invasion. On March 8th, 1925, Union troops stormed the coastal town of Favorin, with Cardovian troops soon following, taking another coastal town on the western coast. Hours after the Greater Alliance troops had begun landing in Rithonia, the Holy Defense Hemisphere had to come to a conclusion. Posture was not enough. On March 8th, at 14:23 in the afternoon, the Holy Defense Hemisphere had launched a war against the Greater Alliance, thus sending the world into the Great War. Once war had been declared, the Holy Defensive Hemisphere sent thousands of troops to help the Rithonian armies, who were quickly getting overrun by Alliance troops. Upon joining the front, the HDH put an end to the Alliance offensives. The Alliance was now faced with either defeat on the continent or digging in and preparing for a long, brutal war. Desiring to break the stalled offensives against the Rithonian cities that bordered the front lines, the Cardovian Department of Weapons Development had begun to put together a new chemical gas, one engineered to destroy a person's insides and moles, Hage's gas. First tested on May 3rd, 1928 against Luminaean divisions holding off UPR's offensive on the town of Maisa, resulting in the death of 26,000 men in 6 hours. Leading to such a great success, the now emboldened Alliance distributed gas masks across the entire front line, preparing for the offensive that promised to break the HDH lines and end the siege of Rithonia. On July 3rd, 1929, Alliance troops, now equipped with Hage's gas, launched major offensives against the cities of Kolonus, the already war-torn city of Bushi, Herring, Fleetwood, and the recently liberated city of Shansk. The gas was new on the battlefield, swept through HDH lines, killing off around 68,000 soldiers within the first week of fighting. With the first 2 months of the offensive, the HDH lines had collapsed due to the gas, leading to the total loss of roughly 260,000 men, and only a few thousand Alliance lives. The Novorossiysk province was cut off by Alliance troops, trapping 6 divisions around the port city. Despite the major losses within the offensive, the HDH cobbled together a new offensive, sending 500,000 fresh troops into the lines, ending the Alliance offensive thanks to the new standardized gas mask. With the momentum lost, the return of bogged-down trench warfare made its stay, and a great stalemate would begin. With the Holy Defensive Hemisphere having suffered over 500,000 losses, the Rithonian people broken and demoralized, the Greater Alliance believed the Hemisphere would be willing to make peace. However, they would quickly learn not only did the HDH not even so much as entertain the idea of ending the war, they intended on fighting until the Greater Alliance was destroyed. With this new information, the Alliance began working on new weapons due to the nullified effects of the gas at weapons in service. Meanwhile, the HDH was already hard at work, designing weapons to break through the Alliance lines. Codename Armored Trojan. November 12, 1931. The HDH rolled out the first Armored Trojan, the Model 1 Crusader, deploying 100 of these war machines to break the UPR lines to liberate the city of Kolonus, and hopefully drive them back to the landing grounds in Favorin. However, the Crusader was slow, heavy, and relatively expensive. It was an easy target for a creeping barrage, prone to getting stuck and difficult to maneuver. Despite these issues, the HDH lines were able to break past and reach Glovok and Forum. Threatened by the new armored Trojans, labeled cruisers by the Cardovian Kingdom, the kingdom began developing their own tanks, with a prototype of 1931 labeled as the XCV 0.01 would be redesignated as the ACV 4332. In 1932, 25 of these final production models were deployed to counter the Lumain Crusaders around the town of Intag, meeting the larger vehicles in close numbers. The battle would begin on January 22, 1932, in the no man's land around the town. During the battle, the strengths and weaknesses of both vehicles would come into play. The ACV 4332, nicknamed Trojan, was deployed by trains before moving against the Lumain Crusaders. The fighting lasted 2 days, resulting in an Alliance victory. 12 out of 25 Trojans were lost, and the remaining 45 Crusaders were destroyed. Crusaders were outmatched, suffering from their low-velocity field cannons, larger size, poor maneuverability. The vehicles were ultimately outmatched in every manner. The Crusader armor was struggling against the Cardovian new 43mm cannons, able to punch through the 45mm thick plates just below that flat plating. The battle was ultimately a disaster by all factors for Lumain, and the lessons walked away with were very deep and tragic. However, there still remained much of Ruthonia to conquer, and the war had only truly begun.